So hello and welcome to this NPTEL course, Introduction to Culture Studies, where we'll begin with a new text today, Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition, which is quite possibly one of the most widely read and is really a classic in terms of culture studies text. It does several things, Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. It talks about culture as a condition, culture as an activity, culture as an artifact. It talks about the unnaturalness of culture as a design artifact which is designed to different human activities. And it talks about human work, labor, and activity in separate categories, which are all equally invested into the formation of culture. So it really gives a very complex definition of culture, which is quite useful to us today. And in several ways, it's a very prophetic text, like Lyotard's postmodern condition, which we saw when we read that, how Lyotard appears to anticipate some of the attributes of the culture that we inhabit today, in terms of looking at micro-narratives, language games, etc., the demise of the grand narrative. So something similar happens in this book as well, which is one of the reasons why we in culture studies, we keep going back to this book as one of those classics for students of culture studies, The Human Condition. So among the many things which this book does, it gives a very interesting critique of Marx, a very interesting critique of Hegel, a very interesting critique of Kant. It gives you a very interesting definition of public space and private space and how the two are invested into each other, and how the human condition that we live today, and obviously by today Arendt means 20th century, how that sees an increase in demise of the public space and the rise of the private space as the only recourse of the individual, the only place where the individual can exert some agency is the private space. So the public space disappears in Arendt's reading. And again, in that sense, we can connect Arendt very interestingly with the idea of Habermas, the Habermasian idea of public space, the public sphere, and the Lyotard's critique of the same. So it's a book, The Human Condition is a book which will find resonances in the various other texts that we have done and will do in this particular course, Introduction to Cultural Studies. So I'll dive right into the text. So this is the beginning of The Human Condition, the very opening chapter, which should be on the screen highlighted in yellow. It's called Vita Activa and the Human Condition. So in the vital activity and the human condition. So with the term Vita Activa, this is Arendt defining, opening the very book, in the first sentence of the book. With the term Vita Activa, I propose to designate three fundamental human activities: labor, work, and action. So, at the very outset, we have a very radical kind of retelling of human activity, of human condition, by mapping out, demarcating three activities: labor, work, and action, and she will go on to define the differences between these three categories in due course. They are fundamental because each corresponds to one of the basic conditions under which life on earth has been given to man. So life, in the way that Arendt defines it, is an entanglement of biological activity and cultural activity, an entanglement of natural, metabolic, organic activity and unnatural, artificial activity, which becomes an artifact in its own right. So this artifact quality of culture is something Arendt constantly highlights throughout this text, and it's a very interesting highlighting, I would argue. So what is labor? So first she defines labor, and then she goes on to define the two other categories, work and action. So labor is the activity which corresponds to the biological process of the human body, whose spontaneous growth, metabolism, and eventual decay are bound to the vital necessities produced and fed into the life processes by labor. The human conditions of labor is life itself. So labor she defines as a basic biological activity, the metabolic activity, which includes birth, growth, reproduction, decay, and eventual demise. So labor is the very core biological realm of human life. Right, so that's the first thing. So you can see there's some structural similarities between this Marxist idea of base superstructure over here as well. But of course, Arendt would go on to revise and critique Marxism to a great extent. It's a very important critique as well, which we'll see as we move on in this particular text. Work. So what is work? The second category that she defines. Work is the activity which corresponds to the unnaturalness of human existence, which is not embedded in and whose mortality is not compensated by the species' ever-recurring life cycle. So work is different from labor. So if labor is biological, if labor is a metabolic biological activity, work is the unnaturalness of human existence, the artificiality around us. So by artificiality, of course, I mean culture can be read as an artificial artifact that we consume, that we create as well as consume in our daily discourses of life. So culture could be seen as an artifact, culture could be seen as an unnatural activity, etc. So work provides an artificial world of things, distinctly different from all natural surroundings. So she constantly highlights the artificiality of work. So what is work? So this is obviously, these are ontological divisions that she's offering us. So they're very important ontological divisions. So if labor is the biological activity which constitutes life, constitutes growth, constitutes a cellular mechanism through which we live, breathe, reproduce, decay, and die, work is the artificial activity which is outside the biological parameter. So the artificiality, the unnaturalness, the discursive quality of work is something which is being highlighted over here. So this is an artificial map that is created, is designed to work as an activity, which is different from the natural world, the natural realm. So the natural realm would include the human body, the human organs, the human cells, the cellular reproduction, etc. Now, work provides an artificial world of things distinctly different from all natural surroundings. Within its borders, each individual life is housed, while this work itself is meant to outlast and transcend them all. The human condition of work is worldliness. So this is a very complex definition of work. So she says work is something which is meant to outlast the individual, right? So the artificiality around us, the culture around us, which is obviously read as an artifact by Arendt over here, it'll obviously outlast, in a very strictly temporal sense, it'll outlast the individual who is bound by labor, who is bound by the biological process of birth, decay, growth, and eventual demise. So work would outlast that activity. So work is an activity which is unnatural in quality, which is designed towards artificiality. So it's an activity which is designed to produce artificiality, an artificial apparatus around us which we consume as culture, which we create as culture, construct as culture, as well as consume as culture. And interestingly, this world itself is meant to outlast and transcend them all. It's meant to transcend the entire idea of labor, the entire idea of biological procreation, the biological activity, etc. So one is reminded, in a certain sense, of this idea of mortality, the idea of the anxiety of mortality that keeps coming up in different philosophical discourses and different literary discourses as well. For instance, one can think of Shakespeare's sonnets, whose constant refrain is the idea of anxiety of the passing away of life, the mortality of life, the very temporal quality of life, the finitude of life, in a sense, and how best to confront the finitude, how best to confront the idea of mortality, right? And in the end, Shakespeare, the speaker in Shakespeare's sonnets, rather, the speaker asserts that only through the idea of culture, only the idea of art as an activity, can be possible to transcend the eventual and imminent and unavoidable biological decay. So long as this lives and this gives life to thee. So this is the closing lines of a sonnet, a very famous sonnet by Shakespeare, where he actually says that this activity that I've created, this artificial activity, which is a sonnet, this poem that I've created, this will outlast me, as I'm immortal, I might decay and I'll die at some point. That's inevitable, and our human relationships will also die that way. But what will outlast us, is this artificial sonnet which will live on forever. And as long as men read the sonnet, this will give life to thee, the addressee. So that's an interesting analogy that you can bring in terms of looking at Arendt's idea of work as an activity. So action, the third category that Arendt highlights at the very beginning of this book, action, the only activity that goes on directly between men without the intermediary of things or matter, corresponds to the human condition of plurality, to the fact that men and not man live on the earth and inhabit the world. While all aspects of the human condition are somehow related to politics, this plurality is specifically the condition, not only the conditio sine qua non, but the conditio per quam of all political life. So this is the extremely essential condition that Arendt points out at the very beginning of this book, the idea of plurality. And that itself is a very interesting definition. And she goes on to say that action produces plurality, right? So action is the very intersubjective phenomenon, the very intersubjective activity that goes on between men. And that is designed towards plurality, to produce plurality, etc., which becomes an extremely essential condition, the vital condition, as it were, for politics, for political life, political discourses. The organic quality of politics is derived from this plurality. If there's no plurality, there'll be no politics at all. So just to summarize at the very beginning of this particular book, a very important book, Arendt maps out 3 different categories of human condition. The first is labor, which is the biological category, the purely biological category of birth, growth, decay, and death. Work is the activity which produces the unnatural apparatus which we call culture. Action is the activity that goes on between men. Right? So one might define action as an intersubjective activity that goes on between men, an intersubjective activity that's designed to produce and promote plurality. Right? So plurality becomes a very key category in Arendt's definition, and that's something that she keeps coming back to throughout this thesis. Okay. And then on the next page, which is again highlighted and should be on your screen, she goes on to define action, sort of give a more complex definition of action. So she qualifies action as the following phrase: action would be an unnecessary luxury, a capricious interference with general laws of behavior if men were endlessly reproducible repetitions of the same model, whose nature or essence was the same for all and as predictable as the nature or essence of any other thing. Plurality is a condition of human action because we are all the same, that is human in such a way that nobody is ever the same as anyone else who ever lived, lives, or will live. So connected with the idea of plurality is the idea of uniqueness, the idea of individuality. So action is linked to individuality in Arendt's thesis over here. And she says that action is the essential quality through which we produce something different from a predecessor. So if we are to be the same model, if we are to be the reputations of the early generations over and over again, there'd be no need for action. We could just do with labor, the purely biological activity of birth, growth, decay, and demise. We could just do with that. But the fact that we need action is because action produces plurality, action produces individuality, action produces uniqueness, which is obviously invested in the definition of culture, in the idea of culture, and the growth and this organic quality of culture. So all 3 activities and the corresponding conditions are intimately connected with the most general condition of human existence: birth and decay, natality and mortality, right? So the very basic conditions of life: birth and decay, natality, the process of being born, and mortality, the process of death. So these are conditions which are connected with these 3 activities, intimately connected, organically connected. Labor assures not only individual survival, but the life of the species. So at a very core biological level, labor is a biological activity which oversees birth, growth, reproduction, decay, and demise. So that is the realm which ensures, which guarantees the survival of a species. If there are no labor, as Arendt defines it, there'll be no survival of a species. A species will die a natural death if there's no biological activity involved. Work and its product, the human artifact, bestow a measure of permanence and durability upon the futility of mortal life and a fleeting character of human time. So again, this is what I meant when I spent some time a little while ago talking about the Shakespeare sonnets, because that's a constant refrain in Shakespeare sonnets, that how to best combat mortality, how to best resist mortality. I mean, you can't resist it literally, because all of us are going to die. It's part of a cellular mechanism that we will decay and demise at some point. But the only way in which you can leave a mark, which might be permanent in the long run, in terms of the human narrative, is through this idea of labor. This is not the idea of labor, the idea of work, the idea of producing an artificial apparatus which will outlast you as an individual, right? So this artificial commodity, it could be a poem, it could be an invention, it could be an artifact, it could be an object. So that will outlast you. You, the individual, you're going to die. All of us as mortals are going to die. Mortality is a basic condition, the essential condition of human kind. But work can give a sense of permanence to this entire idea of mortality. It gives a sense of durability upon the futility of mortal life and a fleeting character of human time. So the human time has a quality of fleeting character. So it's constantly slipping away. It's constantly passing away. So work can only give a sense of durability, or maybe an illusion perhaps of durability, through which we can gain some sense of significance, some sense of meaningfulness. Right? Otherwise, everything else will be futile. If you just rest on labor, which is about being born and then growing and then dying, then there'll be no meaning to life as well. I mean, it'll just be constant repetition of the same cycle. But the fact that we have culture, the fact that we have work through which we can create something artificial which will outlast us, is something which gives a sense of optimism and durability to human life. The third category, action. So action, insofar as it engages in founding and action will be insofar as it engages in founding and preserving political bodies creates a condition for remembrance. That is for history. So action is related to history. Action is related to remembrance. So again, if you remember, Arendt had defined action as what goes on between men. Action as a producer of plurality. Action as a producer of uniqueness, of individuality. Right. So action creates a condition for remembrance. That is for history. So labor and work, as well as action, are also rooted in natality insofar as they have the task to provide and preserve the world for, to foresee and reckon with the constant influx of newcomers who are born into the world as strangers. So the idea of culture over here becomes very interesting, because culture is an apparatus which is designed to sort of welcome, to take in newcomers. So newcomers obviously mean, she's referring to natality over here, people who are being born, human beings who are being born into culture. So in that sense, work and action become very important in terms of creating the environment which will welcome and incorporate the human beings who are about to be born. However, of the three, action has the closest connection with the human condition of natality. The new beginning, inherent in birth, can make itself felt in the world only because the newcomer possesses the capacity of beginning something anew, that is, of acting. So if at a conceptual level, if you had to associate agency, and if you would ask the question, where would agency fit in best in these three categories, labor, work, and action, the obvious answer would be action, because action is that kind of an activity which will produce uniqueness, which will give you a sense of purpose, which will give, which will enable you to invent a pattern through which you interact with other human beings. So action is most organically related to agency over here, right? So because that is how you can interact with other human beings at an intersubjective level. Moreover, since action is a political activity par excellence, natality and not mortality may be the central category of political as distinguished from metaphysical thought. Right, so this is one of the reasons why at the very outset we see the radical quality of this book, where she says that natality and not mortality is a central category of political. So birth becomes a political process rather than a metaphysical process. So she is completely doing away with its metaphysical, philosophical understanding of birth, but rather looking at birth as an activity, as as an event which is deeply discursive in quality, which is deeply political in quality, because that is an initiator into action. That is an initiator into an artificial apparatus from where you can sort of produce action. So if we can relate this to the idea of language games, so Lyotard talked about in the postmodern condition, where he said something quite similar, at least at a structural level, where he said that we are all born into language games, but true agency lies in your navigation through language games, your navigation through the rules of the game. Right? And something similar was asserted by Butler as well, Judith Butler, where she said that agency is not pre-discursive or meta-discursive in quality. Agency is a recognition of discursivity, and agency is as a negotiation with discursivity. Right? So therein lies agency. So you can't really look at agency as a post-discursive phenomenon. Agency is a discursive phenomenon. Agency is within the discursive field, and it's no outside of the text. Right? So again, a very Derridian term, there is no outside of the discursive field. Right? So everything that happens, every action, every activity, every work is part of the discursive field in which we are embedded as human subjects. Okay, so the human condition comprehends more than the conditions under which life has been given to man. Right? Men are conditioned beings because everything that they come in contact with turns immediately into a condition of their existence. So again, this is a very interesting definition of intersubjectivity, of this very phenomenal quality of human beings, the very phenomenal quality of human life, which is also discursive. So again, the very interesting entanglement of phenomenality and discursivity is something that Arendt does quite well. It's very radical. It's one of the many radical things which this particular book does. The very interesting mixture, the very interesting blend of phenomenality and discursivity, the feeling human being and the discursive human being, so part of the same category altogether. So everything turns immediately into a condition of their existence. So everything they come in contact with turn into something else. So it has a transformative quality, a human activity or human action. The world in which the Vita Activa spends itself consists of things produced by human activities. But the things that owe their existence exclusively to men nevertheless constantly condition the human makers. So it's a two-way process, right? So human beings create things, and things make and reform and inform human beings as well. So this again is very interestingly related to what we now call in current critical theory as thing theory, right? The idea of things. So what makes things, right? So, and what makes things waste, right? So the idea of waste and the idea of thing, the idea of commodity and the idea of waste, these are very important ontological categories in which a lot of research has been done today. But the point is, what Arendt says over here is very interesting. I mean, she talks about a dialogic quality between things and human subjects. So how human subjects, they make things, they produce objects, which then become things with a use value, with a commodity value, etc. But at the same time, the same commodity value, the same use value, the same thingness of the thing, they inform and are invested into the making of the human subject, in the complex making of the human subject. So it's a two-way process. They also make each other. The thing makes a human, the human makes a thing, at a very phenomenal / discursive level. Okay. In addition to the conditions under which life is given to man, and partly out of them, men constantly create their own self-made conditions, which the human origin and their variability notwithstanding possess the same conditioning power as natural things, right? So again, the idea of unnatural things, the idea of unnatural conditions is very, very important over here, as Arendt is arguing. So this idea of unnatural things which are just as important as natural things, right? So again, this is very interesting blurring of the borderline between natural and virtual. So she is not really hierarchizing anything. She's not saying that natural is more important than unnatural, etc. So she is actually saying that the unnatural is just as equal as the natural. So the unnatural activity, the unnatural production, the unnatural thing is just as important for human condition as the natural environment in which they are housed. So whatever touches or enters into a sustained relationship with human life immediately assumes the character of a condition of human existence. So again, this is a very transformative quality of human existence in which it transforms everything that it comes in contact with into something human in quality. So this idea of humanness becomes more of a distributive phenomenon rather than a hierarchical phenomenon. So everything that you come in contact with, everything that you navigate with, everything that you negotiate with becomes human by default. And there's a human quality innately in that interaction. Okay. The impact of the world's reality upon human existence is felt and received as a conditioning force. The objectivity of the world, its object or thing character, and the human condition supplement each other. So the thingness and the human condition, they supplement each other. So again, Arendt, and this is one of the reasons why some critics look at Arendt as one of the first theorists of what we now call the post-human condition, or post-humanism as a field of study, which does away with any borderline, which does away with any gap, any epistemic gap or any ontological gap between the organic and the inorganic, or the human and the non-human. That has been done away with. That borderline is blurred completely. And Arendt over here seems to anticipate that kind of a condition where she says quite clearly that the object or thing, the thing character, and the human subject, they supplement each other in a very discursive as well as a phenomenal way. And that mixture, that mixing, that blend of discursivity and phenomenality through things and human subjects, that is one of the conditions of the human condition, right? So the human condition is marked by this blending of discursivity and phenomenality, right? So the idea of corporeality becomes quite complex in Arendt's thesis over here. But the human body is not just an organic human body. The human body is also what it navigates with. So the things that it navigates with, the objects that it navigates with, becomes part of the embodiment process, becomes part of the corporeal process. So corporeality as a phenomenon is phenomenal, of course, as part of the biological process, as part of this affective process. But at the same time, there's a discursive, artificial quality about corporeality, which is equally important in Arendt's contention. Okay. So, because human existence is conditioned existence, it would be impossible without things, and things would be a heap of unrelated articles and non-world if they were not the conditioners of human existence. So, things become a very important component of human existence. We can't really possibly conceive of human existence without thinking of things. And likewise, things inform human existence, and human existence informs things. So human beings create things, make things, produce things. At the same time, they are produced by things as well. They are made by things as well, remade or unmade by things as well. Okay. And now she gives a very interesting difference on page 9 and 10 of the difference between human condition and human nature. And she says these are not really similar things, and she sort of dramatizes the dissimilarity between human condition and human nature thus. So she says, just to make sure that a human condition is not the same as human nature, and this is page 10 on the screen, should be highlighted in yellow. where she says, the sum total of human activities and capabilities which correspond to the human condition does not constitute anything like human nature. For neither those we discuss here nor those we leave out, like thought and reason, and not even the most meticulous enumeration of them all, constitute essential characteristics of human existence, in the sense that without them, the existence will no longer be human. Right? So this is, again, a very important distinction that Arendt is making, that human nature, there's an inward quality about human nature which doesn't really require any external interaction, right? But human condition is this constant interface of the inward and the outward, the constant dialogue between the inside and the outside. And there'll be no human condition without the outside apparatus, without a discursive artificial apparatus that we navigate with. But human nature is the human condition, the human faculty, the human behavior, the human existence, the human inwardness, etc., intellect, intelligence, etc., which are not directly reliant on the outside apparatus, in the sense the human condition is, right? Okay. So this is what she says over here. For neither those we discuss here nor those we leave out, like thought and reason. So thought and reason are considered to be, generally considered to be some of the key things for human nature, and not even the most meticulous enumeration of them all considered essential characteristics of human existence, in the sense that without them, the existence will no longer be human. The most radical change in the human condition we can imagine would be an emigration of men from the earth to some other planet. Such an event, no longer totally impossible, would imply the men would have to live under man-made conditions radically different from those the earth offers them. Neither labor, nor work, nor action, indeed, thought as we know it, would make any sense any longer. Yet even these hypothetical wanderers from the earth would still be human, but the only statement we can make regarding their nature is that they still are conditioned beings, even though their condition is now self-made to a considerable extent. So we are back again to the idea of the human condition. So the human condition relies on the artificial apparatus outside. Right? The human nature is what you are as a human being, and the human condition is a mixture of human nature and your interaction with the external environment. And I should give us a very extreme example over here of, suppose, the hypothetical situation where men are transplanted from the earth and taken somewhere else, and then what happens to the human condition over there. So the human condition changes over there, but obviously the human condition also altered to a considerable extent, but then the condition still remains, in the sense that we still have to navigate with external surroundings, right? So the human nature and human condition are different in Arendt's thesis over here. The human nature is the intellect, the reason, the insideness of the human being, and the human condition is a mixture of this with the external apparatus, which is created through work, which is created through activity, through action. Action, of course, being the producer of plurality over here. Okay, so we'll stop here today. This is the first lecture on Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. We just began to sort of delineate and read the different categories that she lays out at the very beginning of the book before moving deeply into her thesis, which we'll cover in the coming lectures and the lectures to come. So I'll interact with you again in the next few lectures where we'll continue with Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. But this is the conclusion of the first lecture. Thank you for your attention.